Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to AMJ Radio Live on Spaces, a weekly conversation hosted on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, at your very own at AOM Connect. Tune in to AMJ Radio Live every week on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. To do so, look out for the link posted at AOM Connect, or click on the profile picture of the host you see here when they are outlined in a bright color. That means that they are live or on air. This series has a scholar-on-scholar approach where different members of the AOM research community have the chance to speak to and learn from leading authorities in the broad field of management research. The first Wednesday of every month, we invite a special guest to give their remarks on our theme for the month. We recently had guests like Joanna Meyer speaking about Grand Challenges Research Today, as well as John Joseph speaking about decision-making research today. Look out for the link in our bio for the full list and past recordings of our many, many distinguished guests. The second Wednesday of every month, we hear a teaser of The Lit Review, an incredible podcast diving deep into a recent AMJ paper hosted by Sekou Burmese. The fourth Wednesday of every month features an actual AMJ editor. We get to find out a fun fact about this editor, their expertise, what it's been like serving as an editor at the Academy of Management Journal. And I haven't forgotten the third Wednesday of every month. The third Wednesday of every month is interactive and open to being shaped by you. Look for the form in our bio to submit your ideas for guests, to nominate yourself, to suggest formats for this weekly conversation. It's just past 11 now, so let's open up the conversation. I am Dr. Nettra. I'm a lecturer in entrepreneurship at Bayes Business School, formerly known as CAS. Hi, everyone, and I have the distinct pleasure of being joined today by Professor Sekou Burmese. Welcome, Sekou.
Hey, Nettra, how are you doing?
Doing really well. So folks who have joined today, we have Professor Sekou Burmese, Associate Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Sekou is also an Associate Editor at AMJ, and every month he publishes the Lit Review, podcast from AMJ that examines a recent AMJ publication. Sekou, which publication are we talking about today?
So today we're talking about a really interesting paper. It's forthcoming called The Experimental Hand, How Platform-Based Experimentation Reconfigures Worker Autonomy. And I had a chance to speak with the first author on the paper, Hatim Rahman. And also on the paper, he had two co-authors with him, Weiss and Karunakaran, on it as well.
So this is a super interesting paper, and in your podcast, which is already available, folks can hear how the lead author got interested in this domain. There are extensive qualitative work over, is it 16 years, studying a platform called Quick Hire. Of course, this is a pseudonym. It's not their real name.
Yes, I was wondering if you were about to reveal the pseudonym here and out Hatim and his colleagues. But yes, it was a longitudinal qualitative study, which is, unique because you just recognize how difficult it is to collect this data over a long period of time.
Really interesting. So I'm going to play a short snippet now to explain how our lead author got interested in this topic, in platforms and worker autonomy.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, I since I did my PhD at Stanford in the mid 2010 to 20 timeframe, there's a lot of rhetoric about the gig economy more broadly and the future of work entailing a situation where workers will have almost full autonomy, right? We get to choose our schedule. We get to choose what we work on, when we work on. So I was swimming in that rhetoric, and I was actually in the engineering school. So a lot of the people there were the ones who were designing these systems and in good faith, I think with good intentions, envisioning this future. And the ethos of my PhD training and my research is to look at what's happening on the ground. And so that's the approach I took. And when I started to do that, I kind of was believing the rhetoric of like, oh, wow, it's kind of so great that people can choose when they want to work, what platforms they want to work. And so what hit me really quickly was a lot of the rhetoric did not match workers' experiences. And so wanting to highlight and understand the conditions and circumstances where actually both are true. Workers do feel some of the positives that occur with this shift to the gig economy, remote work, so on and so forth. But even as we've seen, in our own experiences, there's usually more to it than just the positives.
I love this introduction, Sekou, to the paper. And you go on to talk about exactly this tension between the public rhetoric, the practitioner discussion on a certain trend. So in this case, the gig economy and how it gives more autonomy to workers. And Hatim actually looks at, well, is this true or not?
Yeah, and so really kind of questioning a basic assumption. And one of the things I love about research like this is it does question kind of a basic assumption that we have, right? So the big gig economy is here. It's large. It's everywhere. We're all probably participating in it in one way or another. But how does it change the nature of work? And I think my guess going into this is that it would have increased autonomy. But in a lot of ways, the platform designers have a ton of control about how things go. And so what you end up getting is somewhat of a cat and mouse game between the workers on these platforms and the platform designers, each trying to, try and capture as much value as possible and also trying to anticipate the motivations of those on the other side.
Okay, so why is it important to even talk about worker autonomy? I think that this is obviously something that was a trend. Okay, gig economy is great, gives you autonomy. But I was particularly convinced by the importance of this paper because autonomy is actually one of the core parts of intrinsic motivation, right? There's a lot of research that shows that autonomy is one of the key reasons why people even do things, and actually our traditional way of giving people rewards, external rewards, extrinsic rewards, such as salary or recognition, can actually counter that. So autonomy is super, super important. What do you think?
That's exactly it. When I teach in my MBAs and we talk about what are the driving motivations, and most say, well, money is a really big one and benefits and these things. And I say, research kind of shows autonomy tends to be one of the strongest drivers of motivation, and thus all the positive things like retention, engagement, citizenship behaviors, culture, all these things that we know are really important, are often driven by this sense of autonomy. And so the ability to learn, the ability to try things, experiment at work, the ability to recognize that self-actualization, right? And so if you create something that's good and all you did was follow a recipe, you don't feel nearly as good about getting that thing done. If, however, creating that product, providing that service required you to make decisions on your own, to flex a bit of your expertise, you feel much better, much more pride, much more identification in the work that you're doing. So yeah, I think it is key, particularly now when companies are really struggling with retention. They're struggling with how do we win this war for talent, and autonomy is one of the kind of key factors that I think inside organizations that they're paying attention to.
So I want to go as soon as possible to the findings because they're super interesting with super strong implications for worker autonomy. But I did want to just draw back on this psychological literature and urge folks to look at self-determination theory and intrinsic motivation. There's a great, actually, TED Talk for those who want a more simplified explanation from Dan Pink, who talks about the famed candle experiment from the 1930s. So yes, okay, this is an absolutely important topic, obviously. And so what do the authors find, Sekou?
So they find, in essence, there are these what they call regimes around experimentation.
Yeah, 3 regimes,
and
right?
The 3 regimes. And so, as you can imagine, they end up talking about, there's some basic ones where it's very straightforward. We're here to try things out. You know what it is. And then there's the completely concealed game where you have no idea you're being consulting. And then the one that's kind of in the middle, which is that both sides are aware of what's happening. And that's kind of where the game gets played. And what I find particularly interesting is that the long-term effects of the experimental kind of regime, where it's kind of known, is that you have more and more skepticism from your workers about their work. And, you can imagine a more skeptical workforce is going to lead to some pretty maybe unanticipated outcomes.
Right. So that was a really lovely summary of the paper, and you can check it out on Figure 1. So it's a forthcoming paper. They illustrate
these three regimes of testing, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So the first thing I think to note is testing is great, right? So folks test inside their own firms. Here, they're testing, let's say, users or folks, who are using their product, but not technically inside their firm. And, this happens all the time. There's the footnote of Uber always having 1,000 experiments a day. So A/B testing, we love it. No issues with that. So they call this the explicit experimentation regime, where it's opt-in, where you have that strong degree of autonomy. And then the second one is the assigned participation, where that's where you would get A/B testing and things like that, where it's concealed. But what you're saying and what the authors were saying was that we're going more and more away from a narrow testing scope to a very expansive testing scope, where folks are not being asked to opt in, and they're not even, being told, but we're basically being experimented on so many different things.
The unbounded regime, right? That kind of is where I think, the authors kind of say, like, there's more and more of this, or we should expect to see more and more of this. And this is where this diminished autonomy just becomes the standard, right? It becomes the new norm. And what are the long-term effects for that?
This is super interesting to your previous point about motivation and the types of tasks we do, right? So when the task is complex and hard to solve, then we need to rely on our intrinsic motivation. When the task is a little bit repetitive, let's say it's folding t-shirts or something like this, then yes, of course, you give me more money per hour, I'll go faster. And what I really loved in the podcast was the parallel between the physical work, which we know a lot about, to these tranches of digital work.
Yeah. And, for me, I see not only, this was done on a platform, which many might say, like, well, how generalizable is that? But I think one of the things that Hatim kind of mentioned this is the nature of all of our work is becoming more and more aligned with this kind of platform-based organization. As organizations go more remote, then people who, you mentioned, like, quote unquote, inside the organization, outside the organization, like, that boundary is so blurred in a lot of ways that who works for whom and who pays whom is really just a matter of perception. And so as more and more people start to say, like, well, my job, I log on to a platform and I'm working in X company, but really I just log in and do my work through a digital platform. And I think that's becoming a larger percentage of how people work, particularly service work, professional work, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I really encourage folks to check out the full podcast. It's quite short, 30 minutes. You can find it at AMJ Radio Live. It's the most recent tweet. You can find it in the thread. Check it out, AMJ Podcast, the Lit Review on all podcast platforms. And the reason I really push you to it is we have this discussion at the very end on, I think is really cool. Hatim calls it, well, sorry, I don't mean to make light of it, but digital janitorial work, right? So what are the equivalents of low-skilled digital work, and how can we ensure that all types of digital work actually allow folks to have a high quality of life?
I also pushed him to make some predictions about employer labor relations and what are his thoughts. And he's someone who thinks, deeply about this stuff. And so we had a really good discussion towards the end of the pod about kind of predicting the future.
Wow. So if you want to hear the predictions for the future, then definitely check out that episode of the Lit Review. And I really appreciate you bringing him on, Sekou, and having this discussion with us. I think platforms as a phenomenon is becoming more and more relevant, and it's been really great to engage with some of the recent research on this month's theme. Yeah,
and to credit of the authors, they did something that I thought that caught my eye, which was to take the perspective of the workers, right? A lot of the platform research that you'll read is about from the designer's perspective, how to design, how to optimally design. And this was showing the opposite end. And so I think it would be nice to see a little more balance kind of as we move forward in this space.
Wonderful. So check out that paper, also linked at AMJ Radio Live, The Experimental Hand, How Platform-Based Experimentation Reconfigures Worker Autonomy by Hatim Rahman, Tim Weiss, and Arvind Karanukaran. Thank you so much, Sekou, for joining us, and see you all next week.